Let's talk about the team situation you've been hoping will resolve itself. Maybe it's the missed deadlines that have become the norm, the low energy in meetings, the friction between two people that everyone is tiptoeing around, the high performer who's gone quiet, the underperformer you've been managing around because the conversation feels too costly. It's general flatness, a team that's functional but nowhere near what you know it could be. Building a positive workplace culture when your team is already struggling is one of the most demanding leadership challenges there is. And it's one that most leadership development doesn't honestly address because they don't teach you that your team is at some point going to go stale. They teach you how to build a great team. But it also requires you to do several things at once that are genuinely hard. Diagnosing accurately, acting decisively, holding difficult conversations, and doing all of that while still delivering the work the team is supposed to be doing. And honestly, that is a lot more than most leadership training programs delivered to you in a package. They'll teach you each individual thing, but putting it all together, that's hard. It also requires something that's talked about even less. The ability to stay clear-eyed about your own role in this situation. Because in my experience, a struggling team almost always has a systemic cause. And the leader, I hate to tell you this, but the leader is almost always part of the system. So today I'm going to give you the framework for doing this well, not the comfortable version, but the honest one that's just a little bit hard. Let's dive on in. Before you do anything else, you need to get the diagnosis right. Because the most common mistake leaders make with a struggling team is jumping to solutions before they understand the problem. And the solutions for different types of struggle are completely different. Applying the wrong one not only fails to fix it, it often makes it worse. There are 4 distinct types of team struggle, and they're worth being precise about. First of all, type 1, there's a capability gap. The team doesn't have the skills the work requires. This might be because the work has changed. AI transformation is creating this consistently and constantly right now. As teams are being asked to operate in ways they haven't before, or because the teams are built for a previous version of the role, the symptoms are often without results. People are working hard. They're busy. Maybe they're optimizing token usage. They're trying, and the output still isn't there. The response here is development, not disciplinary. Training, coaching, pairing with someone who has the skills, or in some cases, an honest conversation about whether the person is in the right role. Then there is the second type, a motivation or engagement gap. The capability is there, but the energy isn't. And I'm seeing this one happen a lot right now with the fear of the current economy, AI adoption, layoffs, even if it's not in your own company, the market. There is an engagement gap because of fear. The energy is flatlining. The team knows how to do the work and has stopped caring about doing it well. This is the flatness I described at the top of this episode. The team that's ticking the boxes, but not bringing anything extra that you were probably used to before. The causes here are varied. Poor recognition, misalignment between the work and what people find meaningful, a trust breakdown, which I'm seeing a lot right now, a trust breakdown with leadership, or the accumulated weight of sustained pressure with no sense of forward momentum. I could probably dream up another 10, but you kind of get the idea. Something is fundamentally wrong. And the thing is, this could have been a high-performing team before. That's when it's most stark often. The response here is relational and motivational, not locking down, not doing more that breaks even more trust. I've seen far too many companies right now. They've got this trust breakdown and they just respond with more pressure. Don't get me wrong, I get where the pressure comes from. You've got to deliver, but you've got to start with understanding what's underneath, the disengagement beneath, before you try to re-engage anyone. Otherwise, you're just going to make the situation worse. Type 3 is a dynamic or cultural problem. The issue here isn't the individuals, it's how the team functions as a group. And I'm dealing with this right now with a client who's got a very dysfunctional group under her. Conflict that hasn't been addressed, cliques, culture of blame, defensiveness, competition between team members that should be collaborating, or a psychological safety problem. Often they all come at once, where people are just not feeling safe enough to speak up, take risks, or admit mistakes. You often get psychological safety causing the other issues. The culture of blame, defensiveness, cliques often comes as a way to manage their lack of psychological safety. The response here is cultural and behavioral. It requires you to actively shape the team environment. It's the type of struggle that most directly influenced how you lead now. This is the one that means you have to decide you're going to lead differently moving forward. And then the fourth and final type, an inherited or structural problem. You've come into a team that was already struggling before you got there. Or the structure, the way the team is organized, resourced, or connected to the rest of the organization is itself the problem. And I'm seeing this quite a lot right now as we are redefining the barriers between business units because of AI. This connectedness across an organization is causing more struggles than ever before. And this is the most complex type because it's often a combination of all three of the previous types, that capability gap, the motivation energy gap, and the dynamic and cultural gap, right? You've got all three of those result in this structural problem. It carries the added weight of history that potentially you weren't part of. And I've done a whole episode on inheriting a poor performing team specifically. Go and check out episode 174. I'll put the link in the show notes for you. But the broader inherited team challenge is worth naming here because it requires a distinctly different starting point. Diagnosis before action, listening before changing anything, and building enough trust with the team to understand why you're actually working with them. Most struggling teams are a combination of one of these types. It isn't just one thing. The reason precision in the diagnosis matters is that it stops you applying the wrong solution with confidence. We often do that. The leader who jumps straight to performance management when the real issue is a culture of blame will make things worse. Performance management should always be a last resort. Now, this is one of the things I've changed my mind on. Go back to episode 300 and listen to all things I've changed my mind on. The naive, optimistic version of me from a decade ago used to think that almost all performance could be dealt with without being managed out. I now don't believe that's entirely true. It's not simple. But what I do see is us still jumping too quickly to performance management when the real issue is a culture of blame that is going to make things worse, or a culture of cliques, meaning that communication or training isn't done well. Don't blame the newcomer if the old clique that's there is not helping that person get on board quickly. The leader who runs engagement workshops when the real issue is the capability gap will lose credibility. So you've got to get the diagnosis right first. Which is why we need to talk about the over-functioning trap, why managing around a problem makes it worse. So let's talk about the pattern that keeps more teams struggling, stuck than anything else. You know something is wrong. You've known for a while. And instead of addressing it directly, you've been managing around it. Quietly picking up the slack when an underperformer doesn't deliver. Does that sound familiar? Maybe doing too much IC work there because it feels easier than doing the fix. Smoothing over the team friction instead of naming it and tackling it head on. Taking on tasks that should have been delegated because it's faster to do them yourself than to have the conversation about why they're not getting done. This is over-functioning. And it's one of the most damaging things you can do to a struggling team, even though it comes entirely from the right intentions. Here's what it costs. First, it costs you your time, your energy, and your strategic credibility. You cannot be seen as a strategic leader when you're in the weeds doing work your team should be doing. Second, it costs the team. When you manage around a problem, you signal, unintentionally but clearly, that the problem is acceptable. The team learns that there are no real consequences for underperformance. This may well be unconscious, but they will figure this out. The people who are performing well start to notice that carrying more than their share is the norm. They start to leave quietly or loudly. And your best people are always the first to go when the standards are invisibly uneven. And then third, and this is the hardest one, it costs you the information you need. When you manage around a problem, you stop seeing it clearly. You normalize it. You lose the ability to accurately assess what's happening because you become part of the mechanism that keeps the dysfunction running. Managing around a problem is not leadership, it's maintenance. And I would say this is one of the biggest things that I work on with clients who come to me with they are struggling. They've come to me because they're struggling and they're unhappy. And if it isn't about getting out of the organization, it's often about realizing they're over-functioning because they can no longer see the problem they've been over-functioning to compensate for. It's quite a hard diagnosis by the time we've got to this point. So do yourself a favor and don't allow it to get to this point. The shift from maintenance to leadership is the shift that I want you to make as a result of listening to today's episode of Leading Women in Tech. And it starts with being honest about what you've been doing and why. Before you do anything with your team, there's something you need to understand about the distance between where you are and where they are. This is the thing I see leaders get wrong most consistently. And it's not just in struggling teams, but in any change or recovery situation. You have information they don't have. You've been sitting with the problem longer than they have. You've already moved through whatever emotional processing the situation required of you. And you've arrived at a place of clarity and forward focus. You know what needs to change. You have a plan and you are ready to execute. The team is at day one of that journey. And this is exactly what I covered in episode 250 on leading through change. And it applies directly here. Go listen to that episode as well. I feel like I keep doing this. These topics that we're dealing with right now in this podcast are so big that it's really worth going back to some of the previous episodes that give you groundwork for how to bring all this together. So do check out the show notes for episode 250. When you're leading a team through recovery or a reset, the gap between where you are emotionally and where they are is one of the most important things to manage. If you move at your pace without accounting for theirs, you will leave people behind. The communication that feels repetitive and obvious for you is arriving for the first time for some of them. The conclusions you've reached through weeks of thinking will feel sudden and alarming if you deliver them without the context that led you there. This matters particularly in 3 ways. First, listen before you act. Even if you think you know what's wrong, spend the first phase of any team recovery process in listening mode. It's kind of almost worth going into a first 90 days or a compressed first 90 days process for this. You've got to listen. And I always think in a new role, whether it's a new company or an existing company, you should listen for 30 days, roughly speaking. Listen, gather data, make assessments, be genuine, curious, non-judgmental, and listen to their experience of the team and how it has been, what's working, what isn't, what they think is causing it, what they need that they're not getting. You will almost certainly learn things that change your diagnosis. And that's what I get people to do in their first 30 of the first 90 days. So treat this as a first 90 days project. You can squeeze the timeline, but treat it as a listening exercise. You will build the trust that makes the subsequent stages, the subsequent changes possible. Which brings me on to step 2. Explain your thinking and not your conclusions. When you do start, after your listening period, when you do start making changes, setting new expectations, having the hard conversations, restructuring how the team works, take people with you through the reasoning, not just the outcome, right? I've been thinking about this because of what I've been observing. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I've heard from conversations with each of you. Here's what I've concluded needs to change and here's why. That transparency is what converts a directive into a shared project with shared ownership. And it's that momentum that you're going to need with we're bought into this that is going to make the difference. Which means that we then move on to the 3rd step. Give them time to process. Recovery is not linear, is not instant. Some team members will respond with a sense of relief. Finally, someone is doing something. Some will respond with skepticism. Yep. They've seen many initiatives come and go, and some will rightly respond with anxiety. What does this mean for me? All of those responses are legitimate, and none of them are solved by moving faster. Building a genuine culture of trust takes time. Your job is to make consistent, reliable progress, not to achieve it overnight. So let's talk about the conversations you need to be having, because most of the time, the difference between a team that stays stuck and a team that turns around is not strategy, it's not restructuring, it's not a new process or a new framework. It's the conversations the leader wasn't having and then started having. There are 3 top-level types of conversation that consistently make the biggest difference in a struggling team conversation. I would say take these 3 and then make them your own. These are good frameworks, but it's a framework. It's not reality. Frameworks get you so far. The subtlety of the individualization of these frameworks is what takes you all the way. So first of all, the performance conversation. If there's an underperformer on your team, someone whose output, behavior, or attitude is damaging the team's functioning, you need to have a direct, honest, and specific conversation about it. Not a hint, not complaining to your peers, not complaining to your team, definitely not. Not a softened version that can be misread as encouragement. There is no place for the, excuse my language, swearing incoming. There is no place for the shit sandwich. It is just confusing. A clear conversation. Here's what I'm observing. Here's the standard. Here's what needs to change. Here's the framework. And here's what happens if it doesn't. Knowing how to give feedback in an honest way without being brutal is one of the most important leadership skills you can develop. And I've covered that again, another episode for you to reference, episode 152. But I want to speak to something specific, to the struggling team context. The performance conversation is not just about the underperformer. It's about the whole team. Every day you don't have it, the people who are performing well are watching and drawing their own conclusions about what that standard actually means. If you've inherited a situation where a poor performer has been in place for a long time, the conversation is harder because expectations have already been set by whoever managed before you. But it's not less necessary, it's more necessary. And sometimes the performance conversation leads to the conclusion that the fit simply isn't right. Knowing when to let someone go and how to do it well is something I've talked about before, but this is never the first option. It's sometimes the right option. And in a struggling team, keeping someone in a role that can't succeed is not kindness. It's a so harm to them because it's going to be damaging their mental health, even though it feels like pushing them out is more damaging. Actually, when you have somebody struggling in a role and they're sitting in that space and not knowing what to do about it, you're doing a lot of harm to them, but also to the team and to you. And I think the team and to you are something we downplay. We think a lot about the individual. I can't push them out because they've got family, they've got bills to pay, and totally understand that. It's not the first thing we ever want to do. But the damage it's doing to the team, to you and the organization, which is paying everybody's income, that's more concerning to me. You've got to look at the whole picture here. Ultimately, to take care of your team, the business needs to succeed. And if someone is stopping the team succeeding, that's not good for anybody. Okay, the second conversation is the conversation that resets the team understanding of how things are going, right? It's not a performance conversation, it's a leadership conversation. It says, here's what I expect from this team. Here's how we're going to work together. Here's what good looks like. Here's what I'm committing to you as your leader. There are so many ways to do this. It's a much bigger topic. But I feel like leaders do not do this enough. They just quietly absorb poor performance, or they just do a complete reset and everybody's cranky about like, hey, we've never had to do this before. The conversation works best when it's done with the whole team, not just in one-on-ones, because it's not about the individual behavior. It's about the collective standard. And you've got to root it in why. Why does it matter to change the standard? Ultimately, we're trying to level the team up. The team that they're operating, the team is operating a level you're not happy about, right? And therefore, you need to have a shared reference point for what the reset looks like and feels like and why. You need to be specific. Vague expectations are the enemy of a team recovery. No, I need everyone to be more engaged, but instead, in our team meetings, I need everyone contributing, not just updating. Here's what that means in practice. Specificity makes the expectation real and makes it possible to hold. And you've got to then keep showing them what you mean by that. So you tell them what it means. And then in the next team meeting, you need to say, hey, X over there, I would really like your input on this. Or Y, thanks for the update. Can you now tell me A, B, and C? Ask them for what it means in practice, not just the updates. I hate update meetings in general. That can be done by email. Meetings should be about a conversation. And then the final conversation that we need to be having, the what's working conversation. This is the conversation that most often gets skipped, but it's the one that determines whether the team believes the recovery is real or just another initiative that will fade. When something goes well, name it, specifically, publicly, and in the moment. What I just saw there, the way you handled that stakeholder challenge is exactly what I'm talking about when I say, I want this team to be its best. Call it out. Now, you have to make sure you don't do too much favoritism here, but the specificity does several things. It reinforces the behavior you want. It gives the team a concrete picture of the standard you're describing, and it tells them you are paying attention, not just to what's wrong, but to what's going right. Recognition in a struggling team context is not about morale boosting, it's about calibration. Now, it does help when you give somebody a well done, But really what you're also doing that's even more important is giving everybody a calibration. It's the clearest possible signal of what success looks like, drawn from their own behavior so they can repeat it. Let's move on to a specific risk in every struggling team situation that deserves its own moment, because it's the one that can make the problem permanently worse. And I think it's the one that is really misunderstood in a lot of executives' teams. When you've got a struggling team, the problem with top-down initiatives is that high performers are watching everything, and if they don't like it, they are leaving. They notice the underperformer who isn't being addressed. They feel the unfairness of carrying more than their share. They pick up on the team's low energy and start wondering whether this is a place they want to stay. And because they are the highest performers, they have options. They can leave, and they will. So first of all, doing nothing, they are more likely to leave. But also doing the wrong thing, these executive top-down mandates, which damage their psychological safety, which damage their trust, which they're skeptical about fixing the very thing they're unhappy about, they will realize what's happening. And long before it shows up in any metric, they will be out the door. And you end up in a situation where through natural attrition that is sped up because of the state of the team and because of the actions of uninformed executives, let's just call that out, doing top-down fixes, what you find happening is the company performance drops as a result of the fix, because your high performers do not need to stay. Protecting your high performers during a team recovery is not about giving them preferential treatment. That's actually really, really damaging to everybody else. And I've seen far too many high performers who are forgiven for bad behavior because they're the star contributor in some specific way, but they have no ability to work with the rest of the team. That, in my mind, is not a high performer, by the way. That is somebody who's very good at doing one thing. But in this day and age, you need people that collaborate, and that's really, really important. But instead, we need to do 3 specific things. First of all, you need to acknowledge what they're carrying. Have a direct conversation that says, I know this team is not at its best right now. I know you're carrying more than you should be. I want you to know I see it, I'm working on it, and I do not expect this to be permanent. Open a dialogue with them. The dialogue should not be blaming other people, but it should be an acknowledgement of the reality of what they're holding and that you are doing something about it. Be open to their suggestions. You do not have to take their suggestions, but this moves me on to step 2, involve them in the solution. High performers want to be part of building something, not just maintaining something. You are only a high performer when you are emotionally engaged. You can be great at your work, but if you're not emotionally engaged, you're not a high performer. Right? We've all seen this. We've all probably done that at some point in our lives. Give them a meaningful role in the team's recovery, not just more operational work, but genuine leadership responsibility. That can be the difference between someone who stays and someone who's always looking for that next opportunity elsewhere. And then thirdly, be honest about the timeline. Don't ask your high performers to wait indefinitely for things to improve. Give them a realistic picture of what the next 3 to 6 months looks like. I would say you should treat this like a first 90 days. So you should be rolling out the solution at 60 days at the latest. Some early wins in the first 2 months. So you've completed the first early win by the end of 60 days. And that is the best way for them to realize that you have a credible answer. There's a signal that your plan needs more specificity if it's not working at that point. I've covered that again before in episode 178. So go check out the show notes. If your situation involves a real risk of losing your best people, that episode is definitely worth going and listening to. And then there's the burnout dimension here too. When a team is struggling, the people who care the most, who keep showing up, keep picking up the slack, keep holding things together, are also the ones most at risk of burning out. I've had this conversation so many times in the last 12 months with exceptional leaders who are fighting leadership above they know, partly because the conversations I'm having with them, they know this recipe that I'm talking about. Their team is struggling, but the mandate's on high because actually the biggest cause is the trust problem. The mandates on high are making it almost impossible for them to succeed, and they're struggling with burnout. Their team is struggling with burnout. The people who keep showing up, keep picking up the slack, keep holding things together, are also the ones most at risk of burning out, and that includes you if you're listening to this and realizing the problem is above you. A struggling team left unaddressed will eventually produce a situation where your most committed people reach their limit first. That is the cost of maintaining the situation, the maintenance approach over time, rather than fixing the situation. I want to spend a few minutes now towards the end of this episode on maybe the hardest bit to have, the hardest conversation to have, but also the one that I think is most important. When a team is struggling, the instinct is to look at the team, the underperformer, the difficult dynamic, the inherited mess, the structure that doesn't work. There's a restructuring, there's pods, there's this, there's that. All of that is real and worth addressing. But the leader is part of the system, and you are part of the leadership. That's not a blame statement, it's a systems statement. If you are the leader of a struggling team, there is almost certainly something about how you have been leading that has contributed to the situation. Even if the primary causes are elsewhere, that doesn't mean you caused the problem. It means that your leadership is one of the variables, and understanding your role in the system is essential for changing it. So let's be specific about the patterns I see most often. I see 4 of them. Some of these are not going to be surprising to you. First of all, avoiding the difficult conversation. The conversation you've been putting off is, in most cases, the single most important lever available to you. And the longer you wait, the more expensive the delay becomes in team trust, in your own credibility, and in the compounding cost to the people who are performing well and watching. Secondly, is unclear expectations. If the team doesn't have a clear, shared understanding of what good looks like, what the priorities are, and how decisions get made, then a significant proportion of the struggle is a leadership clarity problem, not a people problem. Thirdly, inconsistency. Teams take their cues from patterns, not from individual decisions. If your standards of communication, your communication style, or your behavior varies, any of those things vary significantly depending on your own state or the pressure you're under. Your team spends cognitive energy managing your variability rather than doing the work. We've all had bosses like that. We've all had bosses where you spend a lot of energy managing, like, how they're going to show up today. How do I need to respond to that? Not sharing stuff because of, like, you don't know if that's going to be the thing that pushes them over the edge today. Consistency is one of the most underrated leadership capabilities in a recovery situation. I would say it's probably the most underrated leadership capability, full stop. You need to be consistent and predictable. Predictably angry, no. Predictable is so important. People know what to expect when you turn up to a meeting. And then the final one, overfunctioning. We've already covered this, but it's worth stating again in this context. If you are regularly doing work that belongs to your team, you are telling them through your behavior, not your words, that you do not trust them to do it. That signal has consequences for both capability development and motivation. So ask yourself this honest question. What are the 3 simplest things you can do to change how you show up? And this is where simple, consistent coaching approaches within your team become a genuine lever for change, not as a program or an initiative, but as a shift in how you interact with people day to day. Asking rather than telling, creating space for people to solve problems rather than solving them for the people. That shift, it feels slow in the moment, but applied consistently changes team culture and speeds them up. It's slow in the moment. It sits under that mantra of mine of slow down to speed up. But as a single initiative, it never fails. Okay, let's talk about what you can do this week. You now have a framework. So let's talk about how to make it actionable. This week, do 3 things. First of all, do the diagnosis. Before you take any action, be honest about which type of struggle you're dealing with. Capability, motivation, dynamic, structural, or some combination thereof. Write it down. If you're not sure, the listening phase of the next step is going to tell you if that's true or not. Because then second, you have one conversation you've been avoiding. Not all of them, one. The one that has been sitting at the back of your mind the longest. Plan it properly. Use the feedback framework in episode 152 if it helps. And have it this week. The momentum of that single conversation will change what's possible. And then third, start listening. Ask yourself the honest question. If I change 3 things about how I'm leading this team, what would they be? Write the answers down. Listen to your team. See if you did those things, what would you do? You don't have to act out all of them immediately, but you need to know what they are and then pay attention and listen to your team. Team recovery is not an event. It's a direction. You're not trying to fix everything this week. You're trying to establish a clear and credible movement in the right direction. One that your team can see, that your high performers will trust enough to stay around for. This is always possible, even in the most difficult team situations I've worked through with clients. It always starts with the leader deciding to stop maintaining and start leading. If you're listening to this and you can see your situation clearly in what I've described, if you know which conversations you've been avoiding, or you can feel the over-functioning pattern in your leadership and you want to start working with it with somebody who's been there, done that, got all the t-shirts, as well as being your thought partner in this, because it can be lonely doing this work. That's exactly what one of my strategy calls is for. Not to tell you what to do, but to help you get clear through your specific situation, your team, your organization, your leadership patterns, that you can take the right action with confidence. Every month I offer a limited number of complimentary strategy calls to listeners, and you can book one yourself. Go to tonicollis.com/let's-chat. In the meantime, keep leading and keep changing your team for good one step at a time.